Enter the Mayo Experience.
Mayo Experience. Mayo Experience. Mayo Experience.
Welcome to the Pat Mayo Experience, having a Friday hang as we do, touching on some sports, some other stuff too. So, hey, give the episode a like or subscribe to the audio podcast because this one's going to be very podcasty, wherever you can download podcasts under the Pat Mayo Experience. Rate, review, subscribe, do all that fun stuff. All right, bring it in today from dailyroto.com. It is Drew Dinkmeyer. What's up, dude?
What's up, man? Happy to be here on a Friday hang.
Hey, well, sometimes we just gotta hang. Like, we haven't spoken in, months, like, in person, so this is a great time to catch up. And it's always difficult coming up with, like, a list of stuff that's not necessarily, like, what's happening in sports right now to talk about. But with you, we got tons of stuff. So can you give people some background? You did the Welly Maker charity, raising money for charity. Can you just give some background to that? Because that was a really cool idea.
Yeah, so I had seen in the past few years the emergence within the industry of people doing things that involve charity, whether it was the Scott Fish leagues or whether it was some DFS players raising money. Dan Smith, a poker player, and then Chipotle addict and Papa Gates. Those guys gave a bunch of money to different causes, and I really kind of wanted to leverage that interest that everybody seemed to have and that the industry seemed to have as a big heart to give. I mean, we're all playing, for most of us, entertainment purposes and fun. Some of us, like pros like myself, are playing for our living and whatnot, but it's a community that has, resources to be able to give. And it's a community that I think has a bigger heart than a lot of people would assume. Just from kind of looking on the outside in. And so I want to take advantage of that. And I had heard Scott Harrison, who's the CEO of Charity Water, speak on Bill Simmons' podcast a few years ago. And the story just rang true with me. It was a story about a person who had spent their whole life doing things that helped themselves or helped, immediate others around them. Scott had spent a lot of his time in clubs in New York City in the club promotion world. And he loved his life. He loved what he was doing. But at the end of the day, he didn't feel like he was giving back. And that is exactly my story up until, the last 2 years, essentially, when I love everything that I do. I spend all my time doing the things I love, playing fantasy sports, analyzing fantasy sports. I have a great situation with my family and friends. And, having traveled a lot over the last few years, I've seen that, not everybody else is as privileged as I am to have the life I have. So what could I do to make me feel like at least the work that I'm doing is giving back to somebody else? And so I decided to try to make a more concerted effort for myself to take a stronger percentage of my winnings on a given year, my income on a given year, and make sure I was giving back. And so I wanted to do that, and I wanted to engage a community that I felt had a big heart and a big willingness to give. And so I worked with Charity Water to start a campaign. Their charity themselves is incredible because it gives 100% of the donations to building sustainable water solutions around the world to areas that don't have clean drinking water. And then their site is really easy to manage and start campaigns. So I leveraged their great tech platform to be able to start the campaign.
So when it comes to picking charities, obviously it's going to be of interest to different people, and just becoming aware of some of them is really the key to donating the money into it. But when it comes to something like this, where that 100% of the funds is going towards what they say that it's going for, do you think that the technological revolution makes this much easier to do rather than your old school type of charities where, hey, you give $100 and Lord knows where that money goes? It could be going to pay the CEO of the charity $500,000 a year, that sort of thing, because the cost is down and the organization doesn't need to be as vast because you can do everything online. Do you think that has helped out charities and even inspired people to start up charities of their own because it's not quite as taxing anymore?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, what you mentioned there, Scott Harrison talked in his speeches. I've heard him talk a lot around different things because he's so inspiring to me that literally anything I hear or I see a link of him speaking about his cause and his path, I click. And even if I've heard the story multiple times, I click to be inspired. But he talked about how essentially when he polled his friends, when he wanted to start this charity, why they didn't give, because he knew these people had big hearts and willingness to give. They always said, well, I give money to a charity and I never find out how it does. And then they just keep asking for money. And he said, so if I solve the problem, if I found a way to keep you updated on how your funds are being allocated, and also make sure that all of your money is going, you can follow exactly where your money is going into what water projects, into what areas of the world, and we'll give you GPS locations and you can track it. then I can take that concern out and maybe inspire you to even give more. And that really resonated with me. So the technological revolution, being able to connect people from all over the world, to be able to track things, has certainly made it so much easier for charities to hold up their end of the bargain in terms of making sure that the money is going in the right places and the people who are donating feel particularly tied and invested, because that's how you get people donating to a cause over and over again, is if you keep them invested in the results of that cause. So that's one of the things I'm really looking forward to. The money that was raised in the Welly Maker campaign was during the fourth quarter of 2017. So that will be put into work during the course of 2018, and we'll start to get updates on where the money's gone, what water projects are being used with it, and raising over $40,000. That's 4 fully sustainable water projects that are going to be happening around the world, that are going to give people who never had access to clean water, or never had readily available access, that had to walk miles and miles to get clean water, access within a short distance that can change their entire lives. It takes takes time away from people who were going to just collect water and gives them time to do education or do other things that they want to do with their lives. So that ability to track is a huge motivator for people like me who are interested in contributing.
It would seem too that if you can bring on people who, like you mentioned, that have almost become disenfranchised as it pertained to charity and giving money and then giving money back again, being able to track it, that you might be able to pull in, especially if they're, very, very wealthy people or people very high up in businesses, that in just using this example of providing fresh water, that if you can bring in some of these high-end Silicon Valley tech guys or people that run businesses and they give money over and over, that it might not just even be the money that could go a long way in helping this cause. They could bring know-how into developing better products and finding easier, more efficient ways to not only make it cheaper, but more sustainable in these places as well.
Yeah, and I think that's going to be, the big challenge for humanity as a whole over the course of the next, 50 to 100 years, is ultimately that all the cool things that we've built through technology that are making things easier for everybody on an everyday basis is also going to, naturally take jobs away from things that were like manual level jobs. So ultimately, one of the big, decision points for humanity is going to be, how do we solve this challenge of, we've done so many cool things with tech, but now we've eliminated so many jobs. So we need to find ways to keep people kind of invested, and find ways to kind of, give to more people, to give them more opportunities. So I think that's a big part of Silicon Valley's role and the tech industry's role in the future of the world, really. And I think some of the really cool stuff is already being done on the charity side.
Well, it's funny, like when you watch something like Star Trek, which deals with like a utopian future, that's not too far off at this point anymore, but they never deal with what happened between now and then to actually get to that point, because it was like that South Park episode with the underwear gnomes. We steal the underwear, ? Profit. It's going to be figuring that part out that is really the essential question here, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be ultimately like what decides the fate. I mean, there's going to be strife in between when you're going through this struggle of, people are adapting to technology and people are losing jobs, and wealth is being redistributed and different things like that. So it's going to be a really, really big challenge, but ultimately one that we have to come out on the other side of. Otherwise, you're just going to have these huge wealth gaps between those who develop the technology that are going to benefit from all the monetary value of creating this incredible value, and then those who didn't. So it's going to be a big challenge for humanity going forward. But it's been cool to see some of the strides that have been made with technology on the charity side, and specifically Charity Water has been so proactive in trying to be proactive not only on social media and different things, but just in ways of connecting their contributors, and it's been really, really inspiring to see. So that charity has earned my heart. I'm sure there's plenty others out there that have earned other people's hearts. And ultimately, at the end of the day, if you are listening to this podcast, you probably have had a lot of opportunities in your life that may not have been available to everybody else around you. So if you can do something that can give someone else a better opportunity than they were given just for where they were born or the situation they were born into, that can make your day better.
Do you have any plans to do anything like this during 2018, either for Charity Water or potentially something different?
Yeah, I'd like to do another Welly Maker in 2018. I don't expect that we'll have the same type of success that we had in the first year. I think for some people that stretch themselves in terms of their giving, that might be like a once every few years type of contribution. For a lot of people who gave in small increments, I might be able to kind of inspire those. Maybe my reach gets a little bit louder this year in the second edition, but I do intend to continue to do this, and I do intend to continue to use whatever platform I built to try to send this message and spread this message. And I think ultimately I've done a lot of thinking over the last few years about what I'm going to do when I get out of DFS or when I get out of fantasy sports and different stuff like that. And I think my future is probably going to be either in like local mentorship and programs like that, or in charities and different things like that to try to give back.
Well, I think you might, you say that the DFS community is more giving than maybe a lot of people expect from the outside looking in. I think you might be an outlier on the nice side of this as it pertains, because a lot of people, if they had the extra money left over, they just enter that in another DraftKings contest.
Yeah, I mean, certainly you want the opportunities to try to change your life, right? But one of the slogans I used in the Welly Maker was, hey, it's $20 to enter a Millie Maker for a chance to change your life. And on average, it's about like $20 to $30 to guarantee clean access to water for somebody's entire life. So you can choose to take a chance at changing your life, or you can choose to guarantee changing someone else's life. And I will be taking plenty of chances to try to continue to change my own life. But when I have the funds and the resources available, it's a guarantee ability to change someone else's life. I'm going to take that path too.
Well, it sounds easy if you if you have a giant bankroll and you're investing a lot into this, that, hey, you can split up, hey, I can enter whatever tournament I want and I have enough money left over. But what about people, and not even just as it pertains to daily fantasy, but just people in general, if they're not have an excess of overflowing money, they're I guess I was thinking of Lindsay Nagel from The Simpsons. Like, I have no kids. All I have is disposable income. Like, what's something reasonable that you can donate if you're not, like, financially the most well-off person in the world? Hey, let's say someone like me, for example. If I wanted to donate, I'm not rich Uncle Pennybags over here, but I would like to contribute something. What's a reasonable amount to contribute? What are ways to do that?
Oh, I mean, every donation matters in a big way. And like I said, it's not a lot of money to impact someone's life on a guaranteed basis. So $5, $10. I mean, I did tons of donations in that level in the Welly Maker, and those all add up. So those make a big difference. But I mean, if money is a huge issue, and not unrelated to charity water in this specific charity, but one of the things that I intend on taking a more significant stance on is donating more time and just trying to donate time to try to help out. And everybody has skill sets that are unique and that can add value. And so for me, my goal is over the next few years to get more involved in local community and mentorship and different things like that. And so those types of things that, can hopefully help provide, maybe kids that don't have the resources or the time or the familial situation to have, somebody supporting them all the time, and like after school programs and different things like that. There's always opportunities to be able to give out there.
So I would think that even if you can't financially donate or you're not in that situation, even just spreading the word at this point would be something really good. Letting people know that whether it's something as simple as a retweet through Twitter, share it on Facebook, tell your mom or dad, that kind of thing, or someone that could have access to either share it some more and give it access to the people, or just allow them to put it in front of people who might be able to make a donation. I think that could go really well. And I like your idea of, a lot of the people that you're talking about and helping with charity water, not a ton of Americans are going to fall into that situation. I like that your next project is something very local and something that means a lot to you. So that's really great, man.
Yeah, I think it's exciting. I think, look, ideas are super powerful. They're probably the most powerful thing that we have in the world to continue to change things. And so the idea of, even if you don't have the funds or resources to contribute to spread the idea, is really powerful to be able to help others out there. And a lot of this for me has been inspired by my wife, honestly. I didn't travel a lot before I got married, and we've done a lot of traveling because it's a passion of hers. And we've gone all over the world. We've gone to Africa, we've gone to Asia, we've gone to Europe. And just to see some of the differences and some of the challenges in different areas of the world in terms of what you're brought up with and what you have as available resources to you in terms of education, in terms of nutrition, so on and so forth. I had no role in where I grew up or who my parents were or what kind of resources they had. That was just pure luck and pure random draw. So if you can spread the idea that, hey, you have a lot of opportunity and there's ways you can give back, whether it's if you have financial means or whether it's time or whether it's just the idea and spreading that idea, I think that can all kind of help try to make the world a better place.
So you've been to Asia, you've been to Africa. Where in Asia and Africa did you go?
So I went to Singapore. Those two trips were both weddings, actually. I had a friend.
Hold on a second. You have a lot of fancy friends if they're getting married in Singapore.
Yeah. Well, one of the benefits of going to Dartmouth was a strong international population at the school. So had two friends that got married in Singapore early on out of college. That was my first really big trip. And then had a friend get married. One of my college roommates get married in Kenya. So went over there as well, and the trip to Kenya was amazing because we did safaris, and I spent a lot of time with his family and got to know her family a little bit as well. And now, actually, as we're recording this, my wife is actually in Machu Picchu with the spouse of my college roommate's the spouse of my college roommate's brother. So like we met them on safari in Africa, and now we're like traveling buddies. So it's really cool to kind of be able to see the world, and I've been privileged to be able to do that. And it's really opened my eyes in terms of just what I've had available to me relative to what other people out there have.
So I've been trying to do more traveling recently as well. I went to Africa last summer, and when I say I went to Africa, I went to a resort in Morocco, which is probably the least African place you could go in Africa, as from the Africa that we think about. But even just traveling to different European countries and just seeing the big changes between somewhere like being in Iceland and Denmark to going to Austria, and then moving over a little bit and going to Slovakia, and just the vast differences between a lot of these places. What struck you the most when you went to Kenya for the first time? I mean, had you traveled internationally outside of going to Singapore that much, or have you been basically American-based the entire time?
Yeah, not a ton. At that point, I had been to Italy, which was one of my favorite trips. I mean, Italy is just an unbelievable country, rich in history, and the food is just out of this world. And I'd been to Singapore, and I've been to most of the Caribbean islands because I live in Florida. So it's like a really easy trip to check out the Caribbean islands. So I've been to Jamaica, St. Lucia.
Yeah, but you've never been to Cuba like I have like 5 times.
No, I haven't been to Cuba. That was not available to me as an American. But yeah, I had not been to, I mean, Jamaica, isn't a very rich country in terms of resources. So I've been there, but I mean, when I go to the Caribbean, I go to resorts. So it's not like I'm living in the city. When I went to Kenya, I did stay a night in one of my friend's parents' homes, and kind of got a little bit of a scene of kind of what the life is there. And it's just very different. The resources available there just aren't nearly as strong. And so you see, you see a lot of poverty around you. And when you are driving in your, comfortable transport, whether it's, a parent's car or whether it's a paid for transport or whatever, and you're driving around a lot of poverty, it does open your eyes. And certainly it's heartbreaking when you see people that just don't have, they just don't have an opportunity. They're just born into a situation where they don't have a lot of ways out. And that's the situation that I'd like to do my best to try to change in whatever way possible. And for me right now, it's through Charity Water and through people through that organization that is trying to help deliver sustainable clean water solutions to people in rural areas that really don't have the ability to generate those projects themselves. But ultimately, I think everybody deserves a certain level of opportunity to be able to live the dream that they want to live.
Well, it's strange. We talked about how the technology revolution has connected people and made some of these projects available to help people around. But I think at the same time, we think about things like social media and the way that people get into their phones, into their iPads, into the internet, whatever, that it almost creates a distance between people that you drive by a situation where you see extreme poverty and it inspires you to do something. I would guess that the majority of people, well, they might think about it for about 30 seconds, would just go back to having a general lack of empathy towards anything.
Yeah, perhaps. I mean, social media can do, it can be, I think we've seen over the last few years, it can be used for good or bad. And a lot of the technological revolutions, I think we're figuring that out. And the companies are trying to figure out, the balance between those who are trying to use it for good and those who are trying to use it for bad. And the ability to connect with people worldwide and have those connections is invaluable if used correctly. But certainly, you deal with people who are just trying to cause strife and troll and different things on different social media platforms, and it becomes challenging. And it becomes also self-segregating in a lot of ways. Like you tend to follow people who have similar ideas and thought patterns to you, and you get in these echo chambers and different things. So it is a challenge. But I will say that like having your boots on the ground, and again, you have to have some level of privilege to even be able to travel, which I've had, because it is expensive in most cases. But to kind of see just different parts of the world and what's available in different parts. And you don't even have to travel far to do that. I mean, in almost every place in America, you can travel within a few miles and see some areas that don't have the same available resources that you may have. So just, I don't know. It's just for me, it tapped into something that made me want to find a way to give back, because ultimately, like at the end of the day, when I explain my job to people and what I do, it's like I take money from other people playing games. Like that's not really helping the world in any way, shape, or form. So I feel like I have an obligation to try to do it in other paths outside of my primary day job.
Well, I brought this up a little bit before, and I thought it was interesting that after you did this, you were talking about doing the community work, that social media has divided people so much to the point where, did you get any blowback being like, hey, you're doing charity water, that's great, helping people in Africa, what about people in the United States?
Yeah.
Hey, like I always feel like helping is helping. And that's good. All helping is good, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. It's not, and the other thing that was going on while I was doing this is the campaign hit right after all the hurricanes wiped out, Texas and, Florida and Puerto Rico. And I felt conflicted about how much I should be pushing this agenda on social media when I knew so many people were affected locally in such a significant way, and there were competing interests for resources, right? Like if I'm asking for you to contribute to charity water, and you have no idea at the time, if the money is going to like a rural village in India, or if it's going somewhere in Africa, or you're not impacted directly by these people. You don't know them personally, and you might know people who live in Houston, or you might have been to Houston, or you might have been to Puerto Rico, and you might want to donate there. And it's not, I felt conflicted because I know people only have so much money to give, or limited resources to be able to give. But ultimately, like, all of it's good, right? So we should just be promoting these things all that we can, and whatever interest we get in them is great. And that's kind of how I feel about it. But yeah, you get some blowback from people that are like, hey, what about this? What about this? And it's like, look, I give to a lot of different causes. This is the one that I've chosen to put my name behind because the organization the organization is so clean in terms of like 100% of the donations. They have reports on the organization, as opposed to like GoFundMe's and different things, which most of the time you're giving to, well-meant individuals and people who are trying to raise money for good things. But every once in a while, because GoFundMe isn't like auditing the people who are putting up their campaigns, you might run into some trouble. But yeah, you'll get some blowback on stuff from people. And I mean, thankfully I've been getting blowback on Twitter enough over the years that I'm kind of well versed in it. I'm prepared for it, whether it's, when my fantasy picks are bad, or whether it's for, a tweet that people disagree with or whatever. But yeah, it's frustrating because at the end of the day, you're just trying to raise awareness, even if it doesn't raise money for that specific cause in that specific moment.
I want to talk a little bit about Singapore because I'm very interested. I've actually never been to Asia. I was planning. I've had a friend who's lived in Shenzhen now, right across from Hong Kong, for like the past 5 years. He's married. He has kids over there now. He's staying, so he's not coming back anytime soon. Eventually, I'm going to have to get down there to see him. And I remember Cust went to the Philippines for like 3 days for a wedding once, and like he came back and he was just blown away about how. I mean, he's blown away when he like leaves his house and like how society works. So going over to the Philippines probably was just jarring for him. But Singapore seems like a weird isolation in the middle. It'd be like if the only place you had ever been to in Asia was Hong Kong, or then you go to Singapore.
It's Asia on training wheels. I mean, it's the only place I've been to in Asia, so I can't really compare it to anywhere else. But from what I've been told, it's Asia on training wheels. I mean, it is very Americanized. It's very consumer based. When you there's just tons of strip malls everywhere, and it's a beautiful country. It's exceptionally clean. It has that reputation in America because of the gum incident.
Yeah, the caning.
Yeah. So it had me on edge when I was traveling over there. I was like, I'm not crossing a street unless there's a sign telling me to cross the street. Like, I'm not doing anything out of the ordinary. But I mean, that was all overblown stuff that, you know, when you're there, it's extremely clean. It's extremely safe. Yeah, I had basically a host in the bride who was from Singapore, who grew up in Singapore. So she showed us around all the great places, and it was a cool place, but I don't feel like it was like representative of anywhere else in Asia. I feel like it was somewhere between America and Asia.
Yeah, I would think that if you went to some of the major cities in Japan, or if you went to Seoul, you would get sort of just because of the vast number of people that live in these places, that part could be very overwhelming. But I think that even South Korea and Japan would be much different than, you know, going to Bangkok or going to Malaysia or something like that. Or even then you start going to the Western Asia, you get to India, get to Pakistan. Obviously the cultures are way different, but the quality of life is way different as well. So eventually I say I'm going to get around to it, but I say I'm going to get around to a lot of things. And one that's super expensive, I might not end up getting around to, but China, maybe. I'm just very interested in that whole situation to see how that plays out. Sticking with the travel just for a second, you were having some problems with AirBNB, right?
Oh my God. I had such an awful experience with Airbnb, and I've never put any company on blast or anything like that, because generally I also understand, you know, I deal with sample sizes all day long. I understand that my one instance or my one experience is not necessarily representative of an entire company's customer service platform. But I was trying to make a reservation for the U.S. Open. A couple of the Daily Roto guys wanted to go up to the U.S. Open. We were going to get tickets to the U.S. Open, go one day, and then basically just kind of hang out in the Hamptons. And I found this place. I'd never been on Airbnb before, so maybe it's, you know, my bad for not using it correctly in the first place. But found this place, you know, sent in a request for the time. The person didn't respond. They then responded like 3 days later and told me, you know, I'm going to set up this time, but the reservation's not confirmed until I do a phone interview because I've had some bad experiences. I was like, fine. So I agreed, sent my money over, and then the person called me from like a blocked number. I didn't answer the phone because it was a blocked number. They left a voicemail, but didn't leave a number back. So I replied on the Airbnb message saying, hey, I got your voicemail. Understand you want to do the interview. Here's some times to reach me. Got no response for 2 weeks. Sent another note with more times to reach me. Got another no response for a week and a half. And then at that point, like, my money had been held for 3.5 weeks with no response from this person, whether it call, text, voice, message on the Airbnb platform. I decided to cancel my reservation. And the cancellation policy that this person had was that they would keep 50% of the cost of the reservation if it was canceled. And I assumed that our reservation was never confirmed because we had never done the phone interview, and she had said that we had to do the phone interview to be confirmed. So I canceled. They refunded 50% immediately, and then I had to go through this whole process with Airbnb of like contesting the issue. And Airbnb basically just said, "Hey, we contacted the host. They believe their cancellation policy is good. They're going to keep the 50%." And I was like, "What? Like, you're not going to offer anything to help out here?" And I went through like 6 different Airbnb customer service people, and they all just basically repeated whatever I emailed them as like, it was like a template of like, I understand you are upset with, and then like bullet points of my email. And then they basically say there's nothing we can do if the host doesn't agree to give the money back. So I was like, okay, if you're not going to take any sort of responsibility for the host here. So it was a really awful experience. I will not use them again. But yeah, I've heard mostly good things from other people that have dealt with them. But for me personally, there was no protection on the consumer side when a host was unresponsive and not willing to communicate back and forth on anything with the reservation.
So you wouldn't use Airbnb again?
No, I won't be using them again.
All right, well, let's take a quick break to tell you about our sponsor today. Airbnb. That's not good.
That's bad timing.
In fairness, I did just book an Airbnb last night. I've only used it like 3 or 4 times over the course. I used it like when my wife and I were going through Europe. I used it in Iceland. I used it in Denmark. We used it in Austria. I'm using it to go to Montreal for a bachelor party, which is going to be top notch. But that's it's weird because one of the first things I did, because I've heard some of these stories before, is I read the reservation and cancellation policy right away. Yeah. And usually, like, seeing all the reviews underneath things are always nice, but you get into the situation where, you know, those could be fake reviews. Who knows? Like, I could just set up 5 other accounts and leave 5-star reviews for myself, and people would be like, oh, this place is great. And I could just use it as a phishing thing.
Yeah, the other challenge is if you're trying to go to a place that is kind of highly sought after, like an event for the US Open, your options in your, like if you're trying to like manage on a budget, your options can be limited if you're trying to kind of go through that process. So it was probably just as much, I don't know, maybe it was my fault that I didn't use AirBNB correctly. Like they kind of, the customer service people also, the final message they sent me was like all the ways I could have been better. And I was like, okay, well, thank you for this educational response. This would have been very helpful at the front of like registering on AirBNB. And also this would be very helpful if I ever intended to use your service again. But as I've said, I really don't have that intention based on the way the customer service has handled me here. And then they offered me like $1,000 credit on my next trip. And I was like, I don't think you're paying attention to anything that I'm saying in these messages. So yeah, and to the company's credit, whatever, I haven't heard from any other friends that have had issues with it. But for me, it was just such a frustrating experience that I won't do it again.
Well, if they had put this up at the beginning when you had signed up, what are the chances you would have actually read it? I feel like it's one of those like iTunes agreements. Yeah. You're like, yeah, let's get to this.
Yeah, like 1 in 10. I don't know. But I mean, if they started with like, they criticized me because I didn't put a profile picture up. And I was like, okay, well then make it a requirement to put a profile picture up. Like if that's going to be the issue, that the person doesn't have confidence that I'm a real person or whatever. I mean, they already had my money. I don't know, whatever. It's like they had my money. They had all the leverage. I don't know why they need to be concerned if I'm a real person once they have my money, but it is what it is.
Well, I think it brings up a really interesting conversation about consumer rights as it applies to a lot of these services that you see online. And the more and more that these things are around, whether it be something like Airbnb, whether it's like Uber, or whether it's Lyft, or even something like TaskRabbit, where you can just go on an app and hire people to come to your house as a plumber or an electrician or to clean your house. Things like that, that everyone wants all this stuff immediately. They want it to be the cheapest way possible. They want it to be the most convenient way possible. And sometimes, you know, without, I don't want to sound like a regulation guy over here, but without working in the confines of regulation, or I mean, it's very difficult for people to foresee what the regulations would even have to be with so many like random startup things going on, that it feels like the consumer, while getting a good price for 95% of people, that it does leave the opportunity to get scammed, or and even maybe what you're talking about, maybe that's not even a scam. Maybe it just literally on the other end, that's how that person felt. But you know, it seems kind of scammy.
Yeah, it seemed that way, but I don't know. It like I said, it could just be one bad random experience or not. But I was just looking for some level of reasonableness when like dealing with the situation. Like I said, look, if you want to keep like 15% of my money for like this error being on my side, fine, totally. 50% is ludicrous. Like that just makes no sense, because it's not like a late cancellation situation. The person still has 2.5 months to figure out a reservation for this event. Like it's. So I was just looking for some level of like reasonable back and forth on the issue, and I got none from the host or from the company. But yeah, I mean, ultimately, as we move into this kind of new age of so many things at our disposal easily, and new companies kind of created to fill these voids, there is going to be a lot of onus on the consumer to be mindful of the agreements that they're engaging in. And that's one area that I probably didn't handle as well as I should have in this case.
I don't think that anyone handles that all that well. Like, even speaking to the iTunes agreement, I have no idea what I'm giving away. Like, they could owe my life for all I know.
Yeah, I mean, the other thing that would be nice is if the companies could like move those types of things away from legalese. Like legalese is so annoying, because the only one that it benefits is lawyers, who are just making tons of money by making things as confusing as possible in these written contracts. Like, just give me bullet points on like what the heck is happening here. I don't have time to read 100 pages before I decide if I'm clicking accept on this, which is basically what these things come down to. They make it purposefully and intentionally difficult to kind of get through and understand, so that they understand that people kind of won't. And that's the part that just annoys the heck out of me. I hope that like as we kind of evolve further into this platform, that we can kind of find a way to at least summarize things in a shorter fashion that gives people a chance to kind of read these things. Because ultimately, if you make the motto that I'm never going to sign anything, or I'm never going to click anything before I read the whole thing, some of these like 100-page terms of service, like you have no chance. You're going to be so limited in what you can actually use out there.
Well, Drew, my wife is a lawyer, so I don't appreciate you trying to take away her job, okay?
All my friends are lawyers. Like, I live in Florida. Everybody's a lawyer or a doctor. Like,
or a bath salts user or a gator.
Yeah, or both. Or a real estate agent. Like, that's the jobs we have down here. So like almost all my friends are lawyers down here, and I tell them all the time, I'm like, you guys, that's like when they start talking to me, I'll be like, that's something you could have said in 2 sentences. You just spent 4 minutes. Like, I know why you spent 4 minutes. You're trained this way. Like, talk to me like a person.
You put it out on Twitter a little while ago about fandom now versus fandom being a kid. And I think that I fall into this. I've just become very jaded with sports fandom in general. I mean, I was talking to my producer Paul about this a little bit. Just like he referred to the Maple Leafs as like us, like we're playing. Yeah. It's just like that concept just doesn't. You know, I was giving fist pumps, but that concept just doesn't resonate with me whatsoever. And it was before I got into broadcasting and writing about sports and analyzing sports, aka giving bad opinions on sports. But the fandom had been beat out of me. And I know that's not the case for a lot of people, but I thought it was very interesting what you had to say about it, is that you no longer just root for jerseys because they're a piece of laundry. You just root for smart people who are doing things right. Why do you think that is?
So I think I've learned a lot in the last few years about some of the challenges of just like blind tribalism and blind association. And I think through U.S. politics, that has opened up a lot of issues with the world being so polarized in the U.S. and ultimately people just like taking a side and sticking to it, regardless of what the actual idea is behind the decision. And so that kind of resonated with me with like how people are raised to view their sports teams, and that if, you know, such and such player that has a history of like domestic abuse and violence is on your team, you're going to root for them. But if they're on some other team, you're going to be like, oh, that person's a garbage human being. I don't want to, how could you ever root for them? Stuff like that, simple stuff like that I kind of thought through that kind of bothered me. And then more so with my experience and my growth as a sports fan with my teams, you know, I grew up as a Chicago sports fan. I grew up in South Florida, but my family is from Chicago. And when I grew up, the only team we had in South Florida was the Dolphins. So I was raised as a Bears fan, as a Cubs fan, as a Bulls fan. Not so much a Blackhawks fan because we didn't really pay attention to hockey in South Florida, but a little bit of a bandwagon Blackhawks fan. And basically what I kind of realized is like, as the Bulls a couple of years ago, I guess more than a couple of years ago now, the Bulls front office and John Paxson got into an actual physical altercation with one of their head coaches, Vinny Del Negro, that became very public. And then after that, they had constant feuds with Tom Thibodeau, and they had all these issues where they were like throwing players under the bus in the media, and they were just showing no accountability for anything. And I was like, why would I root for these guys to succeed, this organization to succeed? Because if the team succeeds, these people are going to keep getting to run this like authoritarian dictator style of management that creates this horrible culture where nobody feels invested because constantly people are leaving. They're not attracting free agents. Like, why would I want that to continue? And then you kind of look around the league and around sports, and I had a direct comparison when the Cubs transitioned to Theo Epstein, and he brought in this whole new culture of like shared accountability and appreciation for everybody in their roles, and built out a more established organization and made decisions based on analytics. And the team started having success as well, but all the players were happy. Everybody, when you see interviews, they talked about how cool the culture was. And I thought about myself as like, you know, a person who has spent time working in the corporate world as well, and how much I enjoyed working at places that had a really cool culture and really placed their employees first and really cared about their employees. And I thought, man, those are the types of places I should root for. So it just came down to me that I'd rather root for people and ideas than, you know, something that I was arbitrarily attached to growing up because of familial attachment or whatever. So for now, when I see like where the NBA playoffs is going on now, the Utah Jazz are a team that's kind of surprising a lot of people, but they've made great decisions for years and years and years, and their roster is always stacked 1 through 15 with good NBA players. Most teams have like 9 good NBA players. They always have 15. And so as I'm watching them play, I feel like, yeah, I want to root for this team because they've done it the right way. They've done a lot of cool things, and they have a cool young nucleus that's fun to follow. And so I just find myself more and DFS has played a huge part in this as well, because you root for players on a daily basis as opposed to teams as well. I just find myself rooting for players and rooting for front offices as opposed to rooting for specific teams. And as those ideas change and the people change, I just kind of follow where the ideas are. Like I'd rather root for good ideas and good people than, some familial attachment.
Do you think that it has anything to do with, especially in the context of the NBA, you think about front offices, that the NBA, it was baseball at first when they introduced sabermetrics and analytics, but it seems like the NBA has really taken hold of ideas that have come from the outside and they've now infiltrated into the NBA. So you have, like random internet people who are working at ESPN or started their own blogs. They now work within the context of the team. Is there a part of you that appreciates that, about basketball and some of these teams that do that, not thinking that any day that you're going to be inside of a front office, but you might talk basketball with a guy on Twitter and one day that he could be running the San Antonio Spurs?
Yeah, I think that part is really cool. And I think that's a broader message as well, that an organization or an industry can benefit from ideas outside of the traditional norm within that organization or industry, as long as they're good ideas. And so I think basketball and baseball have done a really good job at building more representation from different parts, both from, outside the game, people who might not have a specific history playing the game, but just love the game. And I can certainly attest to that. Like I was never a good basketball player, but I love watching basketball and I love learning about basketball. And so that type of passion fuels ideas and concepts that might be different from people who've played it their whole lives. And it's not necessarily that those ideas are for sure better, but just having a different opportunity to hear different ideas and concepts allows you to grow a little bit more as an organization. And so I think that can be applied to a lot of different areas of life and a lot of different industries, that if you can take some voices from outside the traditional norm of that industry, maybe you can improve. And I think both basketball and baseball are kind of on their way. Basketball has been more aggressive and I would say in general more progressive in trying to figure those things out and trying to make it more of a players first league, which I also appreciate a little bit more.
Do you think the NBA has decided to do this because the rise of NBA popularity has coincided with the rise of the internet and social media as it's gone along, where places like football and baseball, I mean, baseball to a certain degree had a little bit of a jump, but then it's kind of stabilized a little bit, like baseball people get baseball jobs, and that's the way it is. And football is even more pronounced in that way. Do you think that social media and the age of technology has helped basketball because we've learned so much about it and it's risen in popularity? The ratings are up. The interest is up. It's never going to be baseball in terms of, and people can always say, hey, basketball is past baseball. Baseball has the big advantage of it's on for 450 hours during the summer, and TV stations are always going to play it because it's live TV for 3 hours a day. It's never out of your life. It may not have the single one thing that is interesting about it, but where it's always on, it's like me with, if you look at my podcast downloads, I do a lot better than a lot of people, but I also release a show basically every single day. So I'm probably going to do better than the one guy that releases one every week when I release 6 a week. It seems like there's a lot of just even being able to market the players through online. It just feels like that entire culture with the NBA is now dripping into the front office. Do you think that ever happens with something like football, or will football die before that happens?
Football's got a lot of challenges ahead of itself. One, just on the health and safety front, like the concussion issue is a really, really big issue. And I don't know how you really solve that one when basically the game, everybody's getting bigger, faster, stronger in the game. And there's just bigger humans at faster speeds, bigger collisions. That means more impact. But in terms of trying to be progressive and introducing more ideas outside of football, I'm interested to see, because I think it has happened in the other two sports. I mean, I think baseball actually kind of started it with Bill James and people in the sabermetric community kind of getting jobs. I mean, so many people from baseball perspectives now work in front offices across the world, across the sport. I remember I used to hang out on a Cubs blog, Bleed Cubby Blue, and there was a guy on there, Quires, who would make the most interesting posts when I was just out of college, just reading about all this statistical analysis. That dude works for the Astros now, and the Astros just won the World Series, so he has a World Series ring. It's just insane. Football, there's a lot of people that are doing really, really cool work, and I think that area is exploding. Whether it gets into football itself, I don't know. Football in general seems to be run by people who are a little bit more into protecting their own heritage and their history than expanding the game out. But I do think that makes it a more enjoyable experience for everybody to feel like they're involved, to feel like they understand the game because they've been talking to a bunch of people who look at the game in a really cool way. And I definitely I'm not super connected to football. I'm basically connected to it mostly because of fantasy purposes. But like reading people, like Josh Hermsmeyer's work on data and football and stuff like that makes me feel like I understand the game better. And for me as a fan, for somebody who wants to like learn and be educated, that makes it a much more enjoyable experience for me.
Well, it just seems like, and it's not to say to get rid of like all the old baseball guys. I think having a mix of people with just a bunch of different ideas is really the way that you want to approach this. And of course, the Moneyball example from the early 2000s with Billy Beane and the A's is one. But who are the two franchises now that probably lean the most on analytics? The Cubs and Astros?
The Astros definitely. I think the Cubs are probably up there. There's probably a few other teams that are kind of right in that mix. But yeah, and they've had a lot of success doing it. And I think there was so much blowback from kind of the Moneyball because it really, it got made into a movie. It was such a good book, and it got made into this movie, and then it kind of, dramatized the fact that these old school scouts aren't adding any value, which is totally not the point. The point is really to get a collective idea of different ranges of realized outcomes with different people with different perspectives, some with numbers, some with scouting backgrounds and whatnot. But I think it created that tribalistic behavior, like either you like numbers or you don't. And if you don't like numbers, then yell at everybody who does. And if you do like numbers, yell at everybody who doesn't. And it's just such a silly, stupid thing. Like in all walks of life, you're going to benefit from just having a more diverse set of perspectives and ideas, because even though there's going to be a lot of bad ideas that come through that, you're going to be able to test them and understand if they're bad ideas. But if you have only one way to try to solve a problem, if you only have a hammer to try to put together a construction piece, you're only going to use that hammer. So you want to have more tools in the tool set. And I think that's the thing that more of the advanced sports are figuring out, that you need a combination of both things to really be successful.
Well, the biggest thing that I found that a lot of the new people have brought to front offices across all sports is a understanding, because a lot of people, even when you're dealing with analytics, a lot of these people come from financial backgrounds as well and really understand where the assets were. And even when we look at Moneyball, there was nothing really revolutionary about the statistical analysis that was in Moneyball. Like, hey, you want to get guys on base score runs. Let's get guys who get on base. Boom, you're good to go. But it was understanding that, hey, these certain players were undervalued as assets because of that. And I think what front offices, and I think the NBA is especially good at that, and maybe it's just because I follow the NBA people on Twitter that talk about this stuff a lot, but it really becomes ingrained that they actually have a plan beyond what's going to happen at the end of this year. Well, we'll figure that out then. Like Sam Hinkie is the really easy example to look at for this, but there's other franchises doing the same thing. Hey, what's my cap situation going to be in 3 years if I do this? What does decision X have on decision Y that comes 6 months from now? What does drafting this sort of player do for our franchise long term? Let's have a 3-year plan. Let's have a 5-year plan. And obviously you need to call audibles on all these things because we're dealing with sports. We're dealing with humans. Stuff changes. Injuries change things. Bad projecting changes everything too. Hey, that guy's supposed to be good. Oh, he's not good. What do we do now? But I think there's more of that in front offices across all sports, having a legitimate long-term plan. And I think what you see when you get some of the meddling, I know the 76ers are an odd example right now because they're doing so well. But what if Hinkie was still the GM in Philadelphia right now? They'd still have all these players, but they might have even more assets to make their team better and really get themselves over the hump. Let's say they don't win this year. They would have enough assets in place. Maybe they still do to go out and get. So maybe it was a situation where you can't screw it up. But even look at the Cleveland Browns situation. In football right now, I mean, it's like, oh my God, how can the Browns not be good? They have all these assets. Well, you still have to understand what assets that you have. How do you maximize those? But when do you use them at the same time? Like, it makes no sense for them just to push all in for 2018 because they're still not going to win the Super Bowl. Maybe you draft a quarterback, and once you find your quarterback, and if you do find him, that's still a very low % chance of happening, is A, it's Cleveland, B, it's prospecting quarterbacks. But if you do find someone in place, the Rams are a very interesting example of this. They think they found something with Jared Goff. We know we have this window of opportunity where he's going to be cheap. We have assets. Let's push all in around him. I think that sort of forward thinking and understanding the minutia of the salary cap, players' careers, that kind of thing is something new to sports, and it's only going to get better from here on out.
And that's the thing I think so many of the people in our audience can connect with as well, because they're fantasy players. They're playing a game and they're trying to figure out the best, most efficient way to beat the game. And some of that is beating your opponent. Some of that is just beating the game and trying to understand rules and different things. Like I remember playing season-long fantasy in these CBS head-to-head leagues, and there was a huge advantage to streaming two-start pitchers. And so there was this huge advantage to build your roster through the draft around the fact that you're going to screen two-start pitchers on a weekly head-to-head basis, and then allocate your time that when roster lock turns over for that week, you're going to be there to pick up the two-start pitchers. And that was a way to beat the game that was different. And that's what like Hinkie did with trying to figure out ways to extreme tank and ways to draft players that weren't going to contribute immediately. So they knew they'd continuously be bad, that they didn't have a chance to be good right away because they were going to draft guys who were injured or guys who were playing in Europe and different things. And that's what Sashi was trying to do with Cleveland as well, was try to stack the odds in their favor. And now you also have to understand range of outcomes with your sport and what kind of variance is associated and what kind of impact an individual player can make. In basketball, an individual player can make a huge difference because there's only 5 on your team on the floor on a given time. In football, it's a little bit harder to do. You need all the pieces kind of around because you have 11 people. And also in football, there's way more injuries than in other sports. Although basketball just went through a ton of injuries this season, there's more wear and tear on the body, and the lifespan of those valuable commodities is less than it is in other sports. So like understanding all those nuances that go into the individual games, it's just like us DFS players trying to figure out how to win a GPP or how to play a 50-50 game or how to play a head-to-head opponent with late swap or different things like that. You're trying to figure out the best ways to solve the game. I think we can all relate to that. And I think that's what makes sports interesting for a lot of the people that are in our audience.
Well, I mean, there are a few things there. Like one is the range of outcomes. And I think that's where the old school mentality of people running front offices really has a clash with people that are new. Like, hey, yeah, every decision is not going to be the best decision. But as long as we know that, we can always continuously improve and not double down on bad decisions like you see a lot of like the historically poor franchises. What do? Well, they do the same thing over and over. Yep. And then they go even harder the next time because they know they're right. Knowing that you're not going to be right all the time and knowing that, I mean, we can all joke about trust the process. This is a process, but it is a process, and you need to give it time to play itself out. And I don't know if Sashi would be a good GM or not, and maybe he's exactly the type of guy that you would want in football. Hey, you come in for 2 years, make the team as bad as possible, collect all these assets, and we'll just get someone else who's better at football to run the franchise now that can utilize all these assets. But it just seems strange that you would give up on something that people are lauding as like a really great transformation of a franchise, something that other franchises now look at and say like, hey, if we're not good, we're going to do that.
Yeah, it's frustrating. And I can relate as a Bears fan when last year they traded up to get Mitchell Trubisky, and I went nuts on Twitter basically saying like, look, they're giving up a lot to get Mitchell Trubisky, and maybe they're right that he's the guy, but probabilistic speaking, we don't have a lot to go on. The guy started 1 year in college. He looked really good in college. And on top of that, we know the next year's class is loaded with quarterbacks, and you know you're going to be bad this year anyway. So why spend a lot more in this 1 year to make sure it's this one guy when you are going to have 3 other guys in that draft to choose from and maybe 4 or 5 other guys in the next draft to choose from? How do you know this one guy out of the next 2 years is the guy? They also drafted Tariq Cohen last year, and you look at this year's running back draft class, and it's loaded, and guys are going to slip because the position is getting devalued on the whole. And it's like that kind of thinking shows me right away they are not planning years in advance of how to like build a team from the bottom up and maximize assets. They're trying to tackle a problem as if it's a new problem each individual season. And I think that's where front offices are going to continue to spin their wheels. And that's what makes me like lose faith in a front office. Whereas with Cleveland, you saw like last year, they weren't going to spend big on a quarterback because they basically said like, look, we're going to have a bunch of picks coming up and we know more quarterbacks are coming down the road. Like, why don't we build the infrastructure to have everything ready so that when we do draft a quarterback, he has the right pieces around him to succeed on the offensive line and in the backfield and in the skill position. Why don't we build that infrastructure and then we can make a decision when it doesn't cost us the most assets to do so because there's more options to choose from. And those are the types of things that like when you see that kind of process playing out. Now, myself now as, a 36-year-old sports fan compared to myself as, an 8 to 15-year-old sports fan, those things weren't on my radar at all back then. And now this is what makes me gravitate towards smarter front offices over individual teams.
It's funny you mentioned that 2-start pitcher thing as it pertained to fantasy baseball and season long, because for a while, I played in a head-to-head league on Yahoo, probably in like the mid-2000s to late aughts. And it was daily moves. And there was no maximum amount of moves that you could make for the year or for the week. So I drafted probably 2 like ace-ish pitchers, and then I did
all the relievers,
and I basically dropped half my pitching staff every day and just ran people out there, knowing that I was definitely going to win wins, saves, and Ks every single week. Like, hey, have your ERA, have your WHIP. Is that? Do you think that's a common mentality that people who ended up getting into fantasy writing, fantasy content, becoming full-time DFS players? Do you think that's like a common thing that people look for? Like, it's like when you play Monopoly and you know all the rules of Monopoly, you can game the system a little bit. Is that just a common trait that people have who get into this industry across the board?
I think so. I think it's people who like playing games. And I think, one of the most fascinating DFS players I've ever met is a guy who goes by the user handle Beep I'm a Jeep. And he never has ever watched baseball. And he's one of the best. When he was playing, he was one of the best MLB DFS GPP players. And it was all for him. It was just figuring out games. And he's like a world-class game player. And that kind of mind and that kind of thinking is fascinating to me. And I think a lot of us have that instinctually. I know in like my home leagues, starting pitching is super devalued because everybody loads up on closers and they just try to hit the minimum innings threshold so they can win WHIP, ERA, saves, and then like K per walk, basically. And they can win those categories and give up wins, give up strikeouts. And so it's just like trying to understand the nuances of each game that you're playing. And I think a lot of that carries over to DFS with all the different game types we have in DFS as well.
If people wanted to get more into games, because playing games as an adult, unless you're drinking, is kind of weird. Just sitting around. Like, I still play Trivial Pursuit with my wife, but like, I always really wanted to get into backgammon. I don't quite know how backgammon works, but it seems to be like, if you want to understand probability the best, it seems like backgammon is that game.
Yeah, I don't play backgammon, but one of the people I work with actually plays kind of professionally, like on the side.
There's a professional backgammon circuit?
There's like, you can play, apparently you can just play other people for money, and like he makes good money playing backgammon like on the side. Like he played DFS for a while, is no longer playing DFS and now is playing backgammon, and like, it's I don't know, it's cool. Like there's I don't know, there's a whole culture of us nerds out there that just love games and love competing against each other in games and trying to figure out games. I myself have gone into like my side game is Risk, the app that you could, like, I played Risk growing up, the game of world domination, which is ironic given my views on like my hippie pacifist views that like my favorite game is of world domination and conquer. But it's a game that like if you play a certain strategy, it's really about timing and trying to like attack at the right time. And there's ways to like game the system where other people are going for certain things and you're just trying to like wait them out until it's ready to attack. And I think playing games is a great way of challenging your mind. I've also gotten into escape rooms because of that.
I started doing escape rooms too. We did my wife and I did like the first level one and just absolutely destroyed it. Set record times all around. She's like, we are so good at escape rooms. Why don't we just upgrade to like the hardest one possible? We got stuck. There was like a 3-room escape room. We barely got past one step into the first room. Be like, I got no idea here.
I will also say there are not many worse experiences than being stuck in an escape room for like your entertainment value, because you just sit there and you're like, I spend money to feel stupid. Like I feel so stupid I cannot figure out this puzzle. And then like after like I did the same thing. Like the first 4 escape rooms I did with friends, we beat them all. And then we did one and we got in there and they're like, this is like our hardest room. And we're like, yeah. And we just didn't get in.
We're basically escape room professionals at this point. And exactly. I would say if it's, especially if it's something like with you and your wife and you're going to do this, or if you're just a couple and you go to do this, don't let couples play anything harder than the easiest one, because hey, it's great for the mojo in the relationship if everything's going great. You know what's not great for a relationship? When you're stuck in a fucking escape room and you both have conflicting ideas about what you're supposed to do and nothing is working. That can lead to a few arguments.
Yeah, divorce proceedings. So when did things fall off? Well, it was at the China Syndrome escape room. That's where things fell off.
Yeah, it's like, I said I wanted to beat 3 steps. Like, I can figure out this lock by myself. And she was like, no, you can't do that. You're doing it the wrong way. It's like, no, I understand what I'm doing here. All right, well, I'm just going to sit in the corner and do nothing. You go do it. That's basically a reenactment of what happened when we were trying to figure out our diamond heist.
Been there.
Yeah, it's not great. I think you say you go with friends. I've gone with a few friends sometimes too. I feel like 4 to 5 is probably the best you want to go at.
Yeah. So I've actually been like kind of lectured on this.
Oh, okay.
Because
I'm curious.
We did an escape room I did an escape room with 3 other friends and my wife. So we had 5 total. And we beat the escape room. After it, they said, "Hey, we have our like hardest escape room. It's open. Do you guys want to do this?" We got upsold, so we did it because we were all confident. And we actually ended up doing really well in that one as well. And then afterwards, the person, they had just started their business. They only had like 4 or 5 escape rooms, but they had rented out this whole floor of old offices, and they were going to convert each of those offices into an escape room over the course of the next 2 years. And he was super excited. This was a guy who like spoke at all these like escape room conferences, and he told us, and he's like, so the correct number to play with is like 4 or 5. You need to spend no more than 5 minutes on search and find at the beginning. And he like laid out the whole strategy for escape rooms for us. It was actually really cool. Like I don't know. I'm a nerd. I like seeing other people's passion in something. And this dude had so much passion for escape rooms. And he was the one who like designed all theirs. So it was really cool. So 4 to 5, I've been told is optimal. 6 and above is brutal, like really hard to get through with 6 and above. Like you might solve it, but you're going to get there kind of on almost random chance of individuals working together, because you just can't have that many people working together on like one clue at a time.
Yeah, and when you divvy it up between like 4 people, there's usually enough to do that each person can tackle their individual thing, and one person kind of acts as the voice of like, hey, you do this, because that's really important when it comes down to it. Someone needs to be, it could be someone different every time, but someone kind of needs to take charge and be like, all right, here's the plan of what we're going to do. You do this, you do this, you do this. And like the time wasted in the bickering, in the arguing, that kind of thing just is going to kill your time and you're not going to get it done.
Yeah, the thing we figured out with like my group of 3 of my closest college friends, the couple that got married in Singapore, was 2 of those people. We figured out basically each person has a really cool skill set that we can take advantage of. So I'm like really good at word puzzles.
Oh, see, I thought you were going to say you're like Liam Neeson in Taken. Like that's your specific skill set.
No, I do not have that particular set of skills. But I'm really good at word puzzles. Other people are really good at like visually like seeing things and putting them together. And so we kind of figured out like anytime you get this type of puzzle, have that person primarily work on it. And that really helped because at the first time we were doing it, none of us had ever done one before. We were all just like, we were basically all like, you know, children's soccer game. Like you just follow the ball and all the children, it's just a wave of them. That was us with like a clue, just a wave of us like walking around the room, all trying to do the same thing. And it just was inefficient.
All right, well, I might have to get on this Risk app with you. We can just start playing Risk back and forth. Because I'll let you in on the secret to Risk right now. The starting point's always tough. Now, if you can start in Australia or South America, that's always fine because you can consolidate your power. No one's going to really come down to attack you. But the biggest key to the game of Risk is Iceland. You can use Iceland as a barrier if you can trap someone with a single person on Iceland. And that way they can't move all their forces around. And you can always use it as you can just backfill, backfill, backfill. And then when the time is right, if you can own like Greenland and I think it's Scandinavia and the UK that are built off of it, if you can just have that person trapped there, you give up the 5 people at the beginning of every turn for owning the rest of Europe. But you can just move everywhere around the board if you can just leverage Iceland into your game plan. And stay away from Asia. That's always the move.
The game is also 2 different games, whether you play progressive increases in armies with cards or whether you play static. Because if it's static where you only get so many armies per card, it's like that's a game of territories and managing. If you're playing progressive, it's a game of timing. So the 2 games are totally different. Progressive is a really easy game to win if you understand that it's really not about getting hold of a country early. It's just about consolidating resources so that when you get a chance to attack, you have all your resources on one country to move, as opposed to having them spread out, and then you're not able to basically annihilate an opponent, because then you get their cards, and then it's like a progressive thing where you get their cards, you get more armies, and you keep moving forward. So the progressive style is a game of timing. The fixed style is a game of territories and controlling the board.
I don't think I've ever played fixed style. I think I've always played progressive.
Yeah, progressive also, the games go a lot faster. Like you can finish a progressive game in like an hour. A fixed game is like 2 hours plus. It's pretty brutal.
Well, people always talk about that in terms of Monopoly too, that hey, I can't play Monopoly, these games take forever. I feel like my Monopoly games last like an hour, but we always play auction for like the way the rules were intended, where hey, I landed on Baltic. I get to buy Baltic. No, I land on Baltic, it goes up to auction for everyone. Who wants to pay this for Baltic?
Yeah. The last Monopoly game I played was on vacation with one of my college friends in St. Lucia, and he's a finance guy. and the deals he was offering were so intricate, I had to like write them down to make sure I understand. It was like, you pay rent on this property if you land on this one third of the time for the first 3 turns, but in return you get this. And I was like, I need to write all this down. And the dude just manhandled us because he was basically like figuring out, he was basically putting together like structured products on properties, and I was like, I can't figure this out on vacation. Like, I need another pina colada.
Well, the person that you need to play if you're going to be drinking and playing Monopoly is, again, Tim Anderkus when it comes to that. He once read online that the spaces that are most landed on are like St. James, Tennessee, and New York. So he only buys those ones and passes on everything else.
Classic Cuz.
Hey, he's an easy guy to beat when it comes to these sorts of things. Don't play him in Jeopardy, though. The single best Jeopardy player of all time, or Trivial Pursuit. The only way
that makes sense.
The only way you can beat him at Jeopardy is he doesn't quite understand math. So, like, his daily doubles are really bad, and he doesn't know how much to bet on Final Jeopardy. But he answers almost every single question correctly.
Oh, that's hilarious.
All right, Drew Dinkmeyer. You can follow him on Twitter at Drew Dinkmeyer and tell us all about what's going on at Daily Roto.
Yeah, we're in the midst of baseball season and golf season. We're doing our golf work with the guys at Data Golf. We've got some cool promotions that you can check out. Check out our Twitter feed at Daily Roto, DAILYROTO.
Okay, people aren't like slow, Drew. They can figure out Daily Roto.
Some of them are. Trust me, I see my mentions. Some of you out there need that spelled out for you. Not all of you, not most of you, but some of you do. But yeah, follow us at Daily Roto. We've got promotions going on throughout the baseball season that can get you in with really low first initial months to try out the product. We've got our optimizer. We've got customizable projections. All the projection work has been done by myself and Mike Leone. The two of us have been providing content together and projections together since 2013 now. So 5 years of providing content in the daily fantasy space. Not a lot of other content providers have that kind of track record. So give us a shout and check us out.
Hey, anytime you can partner up with the poor man's Pat Mayo, that's what you got to do.
That's right. That's right. The Francesco Molinari enthusiast, Mike Leone.
Yes, I mean, he's secretly the rich man's Pat Mayo, but apparently he's the poor man's Pat Mayo. Well, I will go with that forever.
He's got a kid now, so he's definitely the poor man's Pat Mayo right now.
Yeah, I just want to thank Kay Adams for pointing that out to Mike that time. That was just, it made my lifetime. And I get to hold it over Mike forever.
Yeah, it's perfect.
All right, you can follow me on Twitter at the PME. You can also do that on Instagram and Facebook. Please give the episode a like, subscribe to the Pat Mayo Experience podcast, and that'll do it. That was a Friday hang. I want to thank Drew for being on and thank all of you for watching and listening. I'm Pat Mayo. I'll see you next time.
Pat Mayo Experience! Experience!